Welcome back to Leaders of Today. I want to introduce you to my guest today, Rebecca Miner. Rebecca is a queer clinician, consultant, and educator whose work centers around the intersection of trauma, gender, and sexuality. As a gender specialist, she supports trans and gender nonconforming youth through their becoming and helps parents learn how to affirm and truly see their children. She's the founder of Prism Therapy Collective, where trauma-informed and neurodiversity-affirming care are at the core of every interaction. Rebecca brings both personal truth and professional expertise to the heart of this conversation. As a teen, Rebecca navigated complex challenges, struggling with her own mental health, supporting friends with eating disorders, processing her parents' divorce, and grappling with her own identity. These formative experiences didn't break her. They built her into the compassionate, courageous leader she is today. At just 14, Rebecca wrote an essay declaring that she'd either be famous or a teen therapist, because not enough people truly listen to teenagers. That mission still fuels her work, creating spaces where young people feel seen, building bridges between teens and their parents through empathy, trust, and connection. Rebecca, a published author, lecturer at Boston University's School of Social Work, and the forthcoming author of Raising Trans Kids: What to Expect When You Weren't Expecting This. This conversation is for anyone who believes in showing up with empathy, leading with lived experience, and building a better future for the next generation, especially those who've ever felt like they didn't quite fit the mold. Let's dive in. You're listening to Today's Leaders, from teens to titans. Hi, I'm Lorraine Connell, a teen leadership coach. I transitioned from teaching chemistry to coaching teens in leadership, helping them realize they can do hard things. We've often believed that leadership is an innate trait, but it's actually a skill that you build and improve. On this show, you'll meet today's leaders who share their teenage experiences, revealing how they developed confidence, direction, and the tools to become the leaders they are now. You'll discover how you or the teens in your life have the potential to become confident leaders, even if it doesn't seem possible. Welcome, Rebecca.
Thank you so much.
All right, so I start all of my sessions with this question. Take us back to your teenage years and tell us how those experiences really impacted and affected the work that you do and the leader that we see in front of us today.
Okay, so I became a teenager in the very early 2000s. And just to kind of set us in time here, a lot of low-rise jeans and terrible choices were made. I think the thing that stands out the most about that time for me and how it's shaped my work now is I both had the opportunity to really be in queer community. I was part of the GSA at school and I did a ton of musical theater. So I was surrounded by a lot of queer and trans, now we know, looking back, we're trans, that we didn't necessarily have that language then. And I also really benefited from mental health support. I started going to therapy consistently when I was 14, going on 15. And I think it was through that experience too that I was like, this is something that I really want to be able to provide for young people. So both of those things, I think, and like commitment to social justice and activism probably started at that time too.
Yeah. And I, as a teacher, we had those communities, the GSA, and it was still really early where we started to have adults supporting kids. And I also had, when I worked as a teacher, I knew of 3 or 4 colleagues in my school who identified as queer, but not completely out in the community. And so did you have adults that you could see or leaders that you could see that were identifying as queer?
Not really. I had examples. I had a couple teachers who were either lesbian women or gay men. I didn't have anyone who inhabited any of the kind of in-between gray spaces of identity. So I didn't see anyone who was queer or bisexual or kind of non-binary in their gender presentation. So I didn't see myself in them. Like I didn't feel it. I was like, oh, I'm not a butch lesbian. I know that. And I know I wasn't a gay man, even though sometimes it felt like it. So yeah, I didn't really have an example. I think it took a lot of years to unpack some of the compulsory heterosexuality that was so like convenient and easy, frankly. So it wasn't really until college that I started. Like when I was in the GSA, I was there as an ally.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I think that's so fascinating to really like reflect on that, because you knew that you weren't one of the other binary identities. And I'm finding now that I have this vocabulary of binary, that I'm seeing so many other instances where we label things so binarily, if that's a word. But like, if I am not good, then I am bad. If I am not smart, then I am dumb. And so it's so interesting for me to start to reflect on how easy it is to be in a binary space, but how unrealistic it really is. So I would love for you to talk about the point that you made in that essay. Hit home really hard. You know, we don't listen to teenagers, which is number one, why I started this podcast. In COVID, I was struggling and I started to talk to my students and I was like, tell me what's happening in your other classes. And the information I was getting from them was just wonderful. And I was like, how is it that I've spent 15 years in the space of teenagers and not really ever asking them what they thought? And so that sort of led me on this path and this journey. So hearing that you wrote something as a teenager about not feeling like your voice mattered or that it was being heard, and now you're doing it to elevate voices. Tell me a little bit more about that experience and how it got you to where you are.
Sure. So I wrote that essay as part of an application to Boston University's Summer Theater Institute. So that's why I was like, I'll either be famous or I'll be a therapist. And I then, for many years after that, still continued to study theater at a conservatory level and loved it, but ultimately did decide that being a therapist just felt like what I was made to do. And yeah, it is kind of amazing to look back and see those words and be like, wow, I mean, I was onto something. And clearly I felt that. I think I felt really heard in my therapy sessions and certainly by my mom. And I was never shy. I didn't have a hard time speaking up or taking up space, really. So I think it was less about me not feeling heard and more that I could see how many of my peers were not getting that kind of support and weren't comfortable speaking up for themselves. And also how many of them were really hurting and kind of keeping that quiet and inside, and ultimately resulting in either some more concerning mental health outcomes and compensatory behaviors like an eating disorder or self-harm. And I was like, there's got to be a different way. So here we are.
Yeah. I think you bring up a really interesting point of the fact that like you knew what it felt like to be heard, to be seen, and you were watching your peers not experience that. And so you saw that there had to be a different way, and there was a different way, but how could we make it universal for everyone? And I also was thinking about how, as an outspoken, sort of confident and aware person, sometimes those kids speak up and then they're the ones that get in trouble. And I see a lot of kids who struggle in either or situation, right? They're helping to elevate voices that are being silenced, and yet there are other kids who are being silenced and they don't know how to speak up. So it's really interesting. So tell me how that comes into play in the work that you're doing.
I mean, I think that's all I do. In my individual clinical work with the parents that I work with, it's all about helping people feel heard and also giving them the tools to communicate more effectively so that they can be seen and heard by those close to them. And then in terms of the advocacy work, it's about, like, on a much larger scale, getting people to kind of wake up and listen to some of what's happening that may be outside of their awareness, or maybe they think it doesn't impact them or their community. And we're certainly seeing right now the kind of fallout of the political state of affairs that, if you can assume, oh, I don't know a trans person or I'm not a trans person, so this won't impact me. But the reality is, like, if you have a body, you should be paying attention.
Yeah. And it goes back to that binariness, right? Like, we aren't one or the other. We're somewhere along a spectrum. And I remember I think it was like probably 3 or 4 years ago when I tried to articulate that to somebody, and I was so unable to articulate it. And I just felt so defensive. I felt so attacked. And I wonder, can you speak to how do you enter that conversation with a parent who maybe is, like you said in your book, not expecting what they get?
Yeah, it's a tough question because I feel like I enter every interaction a little bit differently depending on kind of what I'm picking up from that person to really meet them where they are. But what I've found most disarming, if you will, is to really acknowledge that you can love your kid and not understand all of this. And you can love your kid and maybe even not want this for them. And that both of these things can be true. Because I think often parents and caregivers feel like if they aren't 100% in, then they don't support their kid, they don't love them, and they're a bigot. When in fact, a lot of parents are just not educated enough about what's going on, and they're afraid. And they feel like they should have all the answers because they're the parent. And so it elicits a shame response. And so shaming them any further isn't fruitful. But what is more helpful tends to be just acknowledging that this is hard and scary and you don't have all the answers and you don't have to. You have to love and respect your kid. And I can help fill in the gaps.
Yeah. Sometimes I'll talk with teachers, and what I try to approach, and I'm just a facilitator. I don't feel like I'm ever really an expert in any space, but I put the questions out there for teachers to think about, because when we don't think about them and then they occur, we sort of react in a way. And so I thought it was really interesting when you said, when you don't understand, you assume that you are bad or a bigot. And I think, again, it comes back to that binary of, if I don't love my kid unconditionally, and in fact, you still do, you just are missing something and it makes you feel inadequate.
Right. Exactly. And that's what I was seeing was really missing in the space in terms of books, was there are like guides and resources for parents or groups even where it feels like you're welcome in that space when you're already 100% bought in, but any questioning is wrong and shouldn't be there. And so I wanted to create a book that's literally each chapter is based on a question that might keep a parent up at night. And so they can go to the table of contents and scan right to a question that hits me in the gut. Like, that is something that I've been wondering but have been scared to say out loud or scared to ask. And they can go right to that chapter, get the answers that they need, and leave with an affirmation rather than a limiting belief.
Yes. And that I'm afraid to ask questions. That's where I feel like our teachers are in this nebulous zone of, I know I did something wrong, but I don't have anybody in my world to say, can you help me? And so instead of coming to a conversation, I'm just going to pretend I didn't even do it. And that was my awakening moment when kids would say these things to me, and I would be like, I didn't even know, but maybe I did. It's like that uncomfortable feeling that you can push down. And your book, we are recording in April of 2025. Your book is currently in pre-order because it is not yet available, which I have it on pre-order, but
oh, thank you.
very excited to get it, because I think it's a book that everyone with kids or anyone working with kids should read, because you don't know, right? And
Don't know.
I often find the things that I'm afraid of learning about are the things that are really the most important in the work that we're doing as a parent, as a teen connector.
And I appreciate you recognizing that, because I think I kind of had to pare down. Like when I originally wrote it, I was like, for parents, educators, caregiver, like, I had this long list of who should read this book. And ultimately, at the end of the day, it's like anyone who cares about youth.
Yeah.
But really, I hear this from parents so frequently that they're like, well, not my kid, but like our neighbor kid started wearing dresses, or my kid came home from school and asked me why someone in their class is going by a different name. And like, I didn't have the answer that I wanted to have. Like, I want to teach my kids to be affirming and supportive of everyone, but I have to have the language for that too. So my hope is that not just parents of trans kids will read it, but that anyone with kids, or who's an educator or a clinician, or interacts with kids in any capacity really, can sit with some of those questions.
And it's really an exciting opportunity too, because what you already alluded to is when we don't know something, we fear it. And so this allows us to disarm that fear and have some knowledge, and yet still be okay. I find that like one of the hardest things as a parent is when our kids are young, we are superheroes.
Yes.
And taking that cape off is a label that I'm not ready to do. But if I don't, then my kids see that I'm not a superhero and I'm pretending to be a superhero.
Pretty humbling. Yeah. 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 And kids will be the first to call you out, right? And parents share that with me all the time. Is they're like, my other child will never let me get away with misgendering my other, like, even if I make a mistake, it's in passing and I catch myself, my other child is, you need to put money in the jar, or you're going to get squirted with a squirt bottle if you keep messing up at family occasions, which is hilarious and not always how I would recommend training your parents, but every family handles things their own way. But I think oftentimes young people are the ones that really hold us accountable and call us on things because they've had access to this information a lot more than their parents have. They've grown up with this and it's become part of their life in a way that it wasn't even in mine, right? So as I was sharing, I grew up, I was a teenager in the early 2000s. I went to the GSA that some of my clients go to now, literally same school.
Oh my God.
And the same teachers run it, which is wild. And now I'll sometimes ask them, like, do you go to the GSA? And they're like, why would I do that? All my friends are gay. And I'm like, oh, so you don't need a club. Like when I was in high school, it was like this sanctuary space where it was like one time a week you got to be around other people who like got it. And it felt really like safe and affirming and all the things. And again, I was there just as an ally, which I think still is such an important part of GSAs, because so many people who come as an ally, some of them are, but some of them are in their own journey, and giving that kind of gray area of I might belong, TBD, is important. But yeah, it's funny how different it is now. Whereas, a lot of my clients are like, oh, well, I have these like 12 different identities that I have terminology for and can explain to you exactly what they all mean, because there's a whole Tumblr page about it and I'm part of a Reddit community and I'm also on Discord. And I'm like, none of that existed.
No.
I barely knew some of these words. I learned it was okay to say queer when I got to college.
Right.
And started taking queer theory. But before that, like even bisexuality was a word I knew, but it wasn't a good word. It certainly wasn't a word I wanted to be associated with. I was like, that is for girls who just want boys' attention and who are like acting in ways that, I wouldn't be proud of. And now the attitude towards that word, it's almost like one of the basic ones. You're like, oh,
I know what that
got him right. Yeah. That's one of those first 5 letters in the alphabet that just keeps going and going. So yeah, times have changed.
Yeah. So what are some of the struggles that mostly my audience is the older community? So the adults, the teachers. What are some of the struggles that often come up, but are the ones that we're afraid to bring up? So what's the question that like most parents are afraid to ask, but really want to know?
I mean, I think one of the ones that's come up more and more in the last couple of years, I think, is around asexuality. I think parents, and of course, this, in part, we need to acknowledge that, like, I practice in Massachusetts. It's like far more liberal than a lot of other places. So a lot of the families that I work with are like just waiting for their kid to come out sometimes. Like they're like, I know this about you already, I think, but I just need you to kind of tell me. And I think sometimes parents are afraid to ask in general if they think their kid is attracted to someone of a gender they weren't necessarily anticipating. And I think sometimes you don't need to ask a question so much as continue to affirm that no matter who they're attracted to or who they might like or what their experience might be, that that's all welcome here and that's cool with you. And you maybe know other people or expose them to other stories and narratives and hopefully community of people that don't necessarily look exactly like your family or like the other, teachers in your school might have different family makeups. But I think the one that's been coming up a lot more frequently is when young people are saying, I'm aromantic or I'm asexual, that people probably over 40, I would say, maybe even 35, are very resistant to that concept and are like, their immediate response tends to be like, you just haven't met the right person yet, or you don't know that, don't close off your options. And there's this real kind of panic around not wanting that for them. And I think sometimes people have a hard time wrapping their head around something that feels so different from their experience. If you were someone who was kind of boy crazy as a teen, the idea of not feeling that way doesn't really make a lot of sense to you. And at the same time, this may be something that they experience for a period of time, and this may be how they will be for a long time or the majority of their life. But it's definitely one of the things that's been coming up more frequently is, what do we do about this? And should we address it in some way? And I think the answer is no.
Well, and I think that makes sense in terms of the way we should be navigating all teenage romance, right? Like, we don't need to fix anything. We don't need to change anything. We just have to let everybody navigate their journey the way that they're naturally going to navigate it. I'm thinking of my own teenage experience and thinking about, I wonder if I pretended to be boy crazy. I wonder if I pretended to be really sexual, and maybe I really wasn't, and I was just following the norm.
Absolutely. I mean, I have a vivid memory of, I think I was in 5th grade when we had the Scholastic book fair, and you could go to the lunchroom and get to pick stuff out. And sometimes the book would come with a poster or like a gift or something. And I remember the girls in my class freaking out about Backstreet Boys and NSYNC posters.
Yeah.
And I felt very little about that. And I was like, I think I'm supposed to like this. And so, yeah, I do think there's something to be said for everyone's on different developmental timelines, and also in terms of developing awareness around sexual orientation. Even if you did grow into someone who did like boys, you might not have been that crazed about them at 12 or 14, but everyone seemed to be, and you thought that was what you were supposed to do, and that's what it meant to be a girl of that age. Like, there's so many expectations. Right? Like, similarly, I'm like free associating now, but I'm remembering when people started wearing thongs, and it was like a big deal. Like, the idea that you'd have to ask your mom to be like, can we go to this store at the mall? And going to Victoria's Secret was like top of the line.
Yeah.
You had arrived if you had one of those. And looking back, they were so uncomfortable and didn't work like under the terribly low-rise jeans we were wearing. So there was inevitable whale tail. Like, none of this is cute. But it felt like this is what it means to be a 13-year-old girl in 2003.
Yeah. I mean, I guess that's my biggest takeaway from this conversation, is that nothing is going to be normal, because normal doesn't. I'm actually trying to reframe normal and perfect. Like, I am perfect who I am. I don't need to achieve perfection. So normal is whatever is my choice and whatever I do. And so if we take that approach with our kids and their sexuality and their genders and whatever, then it's normal for them.
Yeah.
But
and the norms have shifted.
Yes.
Like, especially with COVID. Like, kids simply aren't sexually active nearly as much as they used to be. And the numbers support that. Kids aren't having sex at the rate that they used to be. And so for parents who were like, necking in someone's car was like a big deal. The idea that like their kid wants to stay home and talk online to their friends and is like, I'm aromantic and I'm asexual is completely foreign to them.
Right. Well, and terminology, right? We didn't have any of these terms. And again, it threatens that normalcy of I am the parent with the knowledge, where the child that I am imparting knowledge on, all of a sudden now the roles are reversed. And so it threatens that system. And I found the same thing when I stepped out of the all-knowing role as an educator and became a learner alongside my students. It opened so much to our whole growth. And so I wonder if that's the approach that we can sort of take as parents and say, we are all living in a time where things are changing and nobody is the all-knowing. Nobody is the expert. And if you disarm yourself and say, I'm going to learn alongside with you, then you never feel that conflict.
And your kid gets to see you as human. Which might be terrifying for everyone involved.
Yeah.
And that's where I say to parents all the time, like, you will inevitably make mistakes. You're going to screw up. Being able to own that is the thing that makes repair possible. And so I think moving away from that all-knowing space to being like, what does that mean to you? Or tell me more about that. I'm going to be curious with you. And not in a like, you have to do all the educating for me. Like, obviously, you're still a parent. You'll hold the appropriate boundaries and things. But it's okay to learn alongside with your kid and to follow their lead around some of these identity pieces especially.
Yeah. I think the curiosity piece is your best tool. Right? Like to just ask a question instead of reacting gives you a moment to breathe, and it gives your kids an opportunity to share from their perspective. And it just comes all the way back around to that original piece that you wrote is we just need to listen. We need to be in community with teenagers. And my gosh, I don't think I would ever want to be a teenager in this time right now because I just feel like there's so much and nobody is really available as that expert, and that was my experience, right? I always had somebody that I knew I could go to who would have the answer, or at least, I guess, faked it. But now there's so many sources of answers, and I think parents struggle because they don't know what is a valid answer, and our kids are seeking answers from sources that are outside of our comfort zone.
Yeah.
There's so many other questions that I could just dive in with you, but I want to just ask you to go back to the teenager that you were and the teens that you see today and give some advice to them to know from your lived experience and your experience as a teenager, what advice do you have for them?
The first thing that comes to mind for me is that terminology is only as helpful as it may mean something to you. So like you don't have to know exactly what category you fit into. It might feel affirming when you feel like you've landed somewhere and kind of found your people, but it's also okay to like waffle around a bit and not be sure where you belong. I see so often this like real seeking for a final answer, and identity is fluid. So having a final answer, right, or that perfect thing is not ultimately an outcome that will leave you feeling like you've arrived, and instead may actually leave you feeling boxed in. So I think leaving room to explore is really important.
I love that. So where can people find the book? The book, again, is called Raising Trans Kids, What to Expect When You Weren't Expecting This. Where can they pre-order that?
So you can pre-order it at all major retailers. However, I'm also partnering with All She Wrote Books, which is a queer feminist bookstore in Somerville, Massachusetts, and they are offering signed and personalized copies. So if you want to support a small local bookseller, I'd love it if you placed your pre-order through them. And otherwise, like Amazon, Barnes & Noble, all the other big ones have it too.
Awesome. I'm really excited for the book. I'm really excited for the work that you're doing. And if people want to follow you, where is the best place to get your information?
I am the most active on Instagram. I have my Instagram page is gender.specialist, or you can go on my website, which is genderspecialist.com, and the links to pre-order and my blog and all kinds of resources are all easily accessible there as well.
That's awesome. And I follow your Instagram and I find such validating information on there all the time that you have say this, not that, or when you see this, say this. And it's just so helpful. I see it daily and it just reminds me that there's always more to learn and to continue to seek information that validates others. And I was just listening to a podcast of somebody talking about the golden rule and how it's like treat others how you want to be treated, but really it's treat others how they want to be treated.
Exactly.
And I think every time I see your content, I'm reminded that it's not about me.
Thank you. That means a lot to me. Yeah. So that's one way to get content. And I also have a biweekly newsletter, so I won't clog up your inbox. But if you're not a social media person, email is another way to get semi-frequent reminders of some tips and tricks and also opportunities for active allyship.
I love that. Rebecca, thank you so much for your time. And this has been really great.
I'm so glad. Thank you for having me.
Are you ready to help the young people in your life unlock their inner strength and step confidently into leadership? The new workbook from Peers Not Fears, Your Voice Matters, Uncovering Your Unique Leadership. It's designed to help teens see the leader in themselves, step by step. It's not just a workbook. It's the first step towards a ripple effect that could change lives. Let's turn today's teens into tomorrow's titans. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Leaders of Today, Teens to Titans. If you found this episode helpful, please subscribe, leave a review, and share it with other parents who might benefit from this conversation. Together, we can support our teens in building healthy, positive relationships and become leaders of tomorrow. Until next time, I'm Lorraine Connell, and this is Leaders of Today, Teens to Titans.